Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. 8 students gathered around their tutor, Mr. Alistair Marlowe. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. The air crackled with excitement, a palpable energy that sent shivers down spines and set hearts racing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Marlowe began, his voice carrying a hint of mischief, "I have a proposition for you all." He paused, savoring the moment as curious glances were exchanged among the group. "How would you like to embark on a journey of self-discovery and artistic exploration?" A collective murmur rippled through the small crowd. One student, a lanky young man with tousled brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What kind of journey, sir?" he asked, voice tinged with equal parts curiosity and apprehension. Mr. Marlowe's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well, Christopher, I'm glad you asked." He paced slowly in front of the group, hands clasped behind his back. "Last weekend, I had the most extraordinary experience at a theater event. I found myself dressed as a woman for a performance, and it was illuminating, to say the least." A few giggles and raised eyebrows met this revelation, but Mr. Marlowe pressed on, undeterred. "It got me thinking about the nature of performance, of identity, and how we perceive ourselves and others." He stopped pacing and faced the group squarely. "So I propose an experiment. For 1 week, we will all switch gender roles." The room erupted into a cacophony of exclamations, questions, and nervous laughter. Mr. Marlowe held up a hand, calling for silence. Now, hear me out. This isn't just about dressing up, it's about fully immersing ourselves in a different perspective. We'll maintain our new personas 24/7 for the entire week. Think of it as method acting on a grand scale. Christopher felt his heart hammering in his chest, a mix of excitement and terror coursing through his veins. He'd harbored a secret for years, one that suddenly seemed on the verge of bursting free. "But, sir," a petite blonde girl piped up, "how exactly would this work? I mean, practically speaking?" Mr. Marlowe nodded, acknowledging the question. "Excellent point, Emily. We'll pair up, men with women, to help each other with the transformation. Clothing, makeup, mannerisms, you'll be each other's guides in this journey." As the discussion continued, Christopher found himself only half listening, lost in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. This was it, the opportunity he'd been waiting for, though he'd never dared to imagine it would come in such a form. "Christopher?" Mr. Marlowe's voice cut through his reverie. "You've been awfully quiet. What are your thoughts on this experiment?" All eyes turned to him, and Christopher felt a blush creeping up his neck. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to say. "I think it's brilliant, sir," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Then stronger. "In fact, I have something to confess." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Christopher's hands trembled slightly as he continued. "I've been cross-dressing in secret for years. This experiment feels like a gift, a chance to finally be myself, openly." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, to Christopher's surprise and relief, supportive murmurs and encouraging smiles broke out among his peers. Mr. Marlowe beamed at him, pride evident in his expression. "Thank you for sharing that with us, Christopher," he said warmly. "Your experience will be invaluable to the group. Now, let's pair up and begin our preparations." As the others bustled about, forming pairs and discussing logistics, Christopher found himself approached by a tall, athletic girl named Jessica. "Hey," she said, offering a friendly smile. "Want to be partners? I could use some tips from an expert." Christopher nodded, grateful for her easy acceptance. "I'd like that," he replied, already feeling a weight lifting from his shoulders. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as the group prepared for their week-long experiment. Christopher threw himself into the preparations with gusto, relishing the opportunity to share his knowledge and experiences with Jessica and the others. In his dorm room, transformed into a makeshift dressing area, Christopher stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the person staring back at him. Gone was the awkward, self-conscious young man he'd been just days ago. In his place stood a vision of femininity. Long chestnut hair cascading over shoulders, subtle makeup enhancing already delicate features, and a flowing sundress that hugged curves in all the right places. "Wow," Jessica breathed, standing beside him. "You look amazing. I can't believe the transformation." Christopher, or rather Christy, as he'd chosen to be called for the week, smiled, a newfound confidence radiating from within. "Thanks," Christy replied, voice pitched higher and softer than usual. "It feels right, you know? Like I'm finally seeing the real me." Jessica nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd undergone her own transformation, now sporting short, spiky hair and baggy clothes that concealed her feminine figure. "I get it," she said. "It's liberating, isn't it, to step outside the box society's put us in?" As they made their way across campus to their first class of the experiment, Christy couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed them. Some were curious, others disapproving, but Christy held her head high, drawing strength from Jessica's presence beside her. Entering the lecture hall, they found the rest of their group already assembled, each having undergone their own remarkable transformations. Mr. Marlowe, now Miss Marlowe, greeted them with a warm smile, looking elegant in a tailored pantsuit and perfectly coiffed silver hair. "Welcome, everyone," she said, gesturing for them to take their seats. "Today marks the beginning of our journey. Remember, this isn't just about appearances. It's about truly stepping into another's shoes, experiencing the world from a different perspective." As the lecture began, Christy found herself more engaged than ever before. Free from the constraints of hiding her true self, she participated enthusiastically in discussions, her insights colored by years of living a double life. During a break, Christy overheard two of her classmates, formerly Mike and Tom, now Michelle and Tanya, discussing their experiences so far. "I never realized how much effort goes into being a woman," Michelle was saying, adjusting her bra strap with a grimace. "The clothes, the makeup, the constant awareness of how you're being perceived." Tanya nodded emphatically. "Tell me about it. And don't even get me started on heels. How do they walk in these things all day?" Christy couldn't help but smile to herself. For her, these challenges were a source of joy, each carefully applied stroke of mascara or click of heels against pavement a small act of self-expression. As the week progressed, Christy found herself blossoming. She reveled in the freedom to express herself fully, no longer confined by societal expectations or her own fears. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and she noticed her classmates becoming more comfortable in their new roles as well. One evening, as Christy and Jessica sat in their shared dorm room, Jessica broached a subject that had been on both their minds. "So," she began, running a hand through her short hair, "what happens after this week is over? Do we just go back to how things were before?" Christy was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I don't think I can," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This week has shown me who I truly am. I don't want to hide anymore." Jessica reached out, squeezing Christy's hand supportively. "Then don't," she said simply. "You've got friends who support you, Christy. We've got your back." Tears welled up in Christy's eyes, a mixture of gratitude and relief washing over her. "Thank you," she managed, her voice choked with emotion. The final day of the experiment arrived all too soon. The group gathered once more in the lecture hall, a tangible sense of excitement and nervousness permeating the air. Miss Marlowe stood at the front, a proud smile on her face as she surveyed her students. "Well, my dears," she began, "we've come to the end of our little experiment. I'd like each of you to share your experiences, what you've learned, and how this week has changed your perspective." One by one, the students spoke, each story unique yet bound by a common thread of newfound understanding and empathy. When it was Christy's turn to speak, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "This week has been Transformative, she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. For years, I've been living a double life, hiding my true self from the world. But this experiment gave me the courage to embrace who I really am. She paused, looking around at the supportive faces of her classmates before continuing. I've decided to continue living as Christy beyond this week. It's who I am, who I've always been, and I'm done hiding. A wave of applause and cheers erupted from the group, led by a beaming Miss Marlowe. Christy felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she was enveloped in a group hug, the love and acceptance of her peers washing over her. As the excitement died down and the group began to disperse, Miss Marlowe approached Christy, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Christy," she said softly.
It takes immense courage to be true to oneself in a world that often demands conformity. Remember, your journey is just beginning, and there will be challenges ahead. But you have a support system here, and you've shown remarkable strength already.
Christy nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Marlowe, for everything. This experiment, it changed my life." Miss Marlowe smiled warmly.
That was the hope, my dear, for all of you to learn something about yourselves and others. Now, go on. Your new life awaits.
For Christy, the experience was nothing short of liberating. She reveled in the freedom to express herself fully, no longer constrained by societal expectations or her own fears. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and she noticed her classmates becoming more comfortable in their new roles as well. One afternoon, as Christy sat in the campus coffee shop, sipping a latte and working on an essay, she overheard a conversation at a nearby table. "Did you see that guy in a dress earlier? What a freak!" Christy's heart raced, but she took a deep breath and turned to face the speaker, a burly young man with a sneer on his face. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I couldn't help but overhear. I'm curious, what exactly makes someone a freak in your eyes?" The young man looked taken aback, clearly not expecting to be confronted. His friend shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It's just not normal, you know," he stammered. Christy raised an eyebrow. "And who decides what's normal? Throughout history, people have challenged societal norms and pushed boundaries. That's how progress happens." The young man's face reddened, but before he could respond, his friend spoke up.
"She's got a point, man. Live and let live, right?"
Christy offered a small smile. "Exactly. The world's a big place. There's room for all kinds of people." As she turned back to her work, she caught a glimpse of Jessica entering the coffee shop. Her friend's eyes lit up when she spotted Christy, and she made her way over. "Hey, you," Jessica said, sliding into the seat across from Christy. "How's it going?" Christy recounted the exchange she'd just had, and Jessica listened intently, her expression a mix of concern and pride. "That was really brave of you," Jessica said when Christy finished. "How are you feeling?" Christy considered the question for a moment. "Honestly, pretty good. A week ago, I would have been terrified to speak up like that. But now, it feels right. Like I'm finally standing up for myself." Jessica reached across the table and squeezed Christy's hand. "I'm proud of you. You know, this experiment has been eye-opening for me too. I never realized how much pressure there is to conform to gender norms until I stepped outside of them." As they continued to chat, Christy found herself marveling at how much had changed in just a few short days. Not just for her, but for all of them. The experiment had opened doors and minds, challenging preconceptions and fostering empathy. Later that evening, the group gathered in Mr. Marlowe's classroom for a check-in session. The atmosphere was electric, filled with excited chatter as everyone shared their experiences.
"All right, settle down,"
Mr. Marlowe called, a smile playing on his lips. "I want to hear from each of you. What's been the most surprising aspect of this experiment so far?" Emily, now going by Ethan, spoke up first. "I've noticed how differently people treat me. As a woman, I was used to being interrupted or talked over in discussions, but now people seem to listen more when I speak. It's Unsettling, honestly. Nods of agreement rippled through the group. Tom, now Tanya, chimed in next.
For me, it's been the constant awareness of my body, the way I sit, walk, even gesture. I never realized how ingrained these behaviors were until I had to consciously change them. As the discussion continued, Christy found herself hanging on every word, recognizing her own experiences in her classmates' stories. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath. The most surprising thing for me, she began, has been the sense of peace I feel. For years, I've been at war with myself, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. But now, living openly as Christy, it feels like coming home. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the sound of quiet sniffles. Mr. Marlowe's eyes shone with pride as he addressed the group. What you're all experiencing, he said softly, is the power of empathy and self-discovery. By walking in someone else's shoes, you've not only gained insight into their experiences, but also into your own identities and assumptions. As the session wound down, Christy found herself deep in thought. The experiment had started as a way to challenge perceptions and broaden horizons, but it had become so much more. For her, it was the beginning of a new life. The final day of the experiment dawned bright and clear. Christy stood before the mirror in her dorm room, taking in her reflection. The person staring back at her was no longer a stranger, no longer a secret to be hidden away. She was Christy, fully and completely. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Jessica, looking both excited and a little nervous. "Ready for the big reveal?" she asked, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. Christy nodded, a mix of emotions swirling in her chest. "As ready as I'll ever be." They made their way to the lecture hall where the rest of the group was already assembled. The air crackled with anticipation as Mr. Marlowe called for attention. "Well, My dear students," he began, his voice filled with warmth, "we've come to the end of our experiment. But before we conclude, I want each of you to share what you've learned, how you've grown, and what you'll take away from this experience." One by one, the students spoke, their words painting a picture of transformation and understanding. When it was Christy's turn, she stood, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "This week has been life-changing," she began. "For years, I've been living a double life, hiding my true self from the world. But this experiment gave me the courage to embrace who I really am." She paused, looking around at the supportive faces of her classmates before continuing. "I've decided to continue living as Christy beyond this week. It's who I am, who I've always been, and I'm done hiding." A wave of applause and cheers erupted from the group, led by a beaming Mr. Marlowe. Christy felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she was enveloped in a group hug, the love and acceptance of her peers washing over her. As the excitement died down and the group began to disperse, Mr. Marlowe approached Christy, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Christy," he said softly. "It takes immense courage to be true to oneself in a world that often demands conformity. Remember, your journey is just beginning, and there will be challenges ahead. But you have a support system here, and you've shown remarkable strength already." Christy nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Marlowe, for everything. This experiment, it changed my life." Mr. Marlowe smiled warmly. "That was the hope, my dear, for all of you to learn something about yourselves and others. Now, go on. Your new life awaits." As Christy stepped out into the sunlight, she felt a sense of lightness, of freedom she'd never experienced before. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities and challenges. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face it all as her true self. She silently thanked Mr. Marlowe once again and the theater group that had inadvertently set these events in motion. Their simple act of inclusivity had sparked a chain reaction, one that had allowed Christy and her classmates to explore the depths of identity and self-expression.
As she walked across campus, head held high in her favorite sundress, Christy couldn't help but smile. The experiment was over, but her journey was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead. Her parents, initially shocked by her revelation, rallied around her with love and understanding. Her father, a gruff man of few words, surprised her with his eloquence when he said, "All I've ever wanted is for you to be happy, kiddo. If this is what makes you happy, then I'm behind you 100%. Her mother, tears in her eyes, simply hugged her and whispered, "I love you no matter what." On campus, Christy found herself becoming something of an unofficial spokesperson for the transgender community. She spoke at LGBTQ+ events, sharing her story and offering support to others who were struggling with their identities. Christy made her way to the student center for a panel discussion on gender identity. As she approached the building, she noticed a small group of protesters gathered near the entrance, their signs bearing hateful slogans. For a moment, fear gripped her heart. But then, she remembered Mr. Marlowe's words about courage, and she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked purposefully towards the door. To her surprise, a line of students had formed in front of the protesters, creating a human barrier. Among them, she recognized Jessica, Emily, Tom, and the rest of her classmates from the experiment. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces set in determination. As Christy drew near, Jessica broke from the line and came to stand beside her. "We've got your back," she said simply, linking her arm through Christy's. Touched beyond words, Christy could only nod as they walked together into the building, past the ineffectual shouts of the protesters. Inside, the auditorium was packed. Christy took her place on the stage alongside other panelists, her nerves settling as she gazed out at the sea of supportive faces. As the discussion began, Christy found herself speaking from the heart, her words flowing easily as she shared her experiences. "Identity isn't something that's fixed," she said in response to a question. "It's a journey of self-discovery, and sometimes that journey takes us to unexpected places. The most important thing is to be true to yourself, wherever that truth may lead you." The audience hung on her every word, and when the panel concluded, Christy was surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories or express their support. As the crowd thinned, she spotted Mr. Marlowe standing near the back of the room. He caught her eye and gave her a proud nod, which Christy returned with a grateful smile. Later that evening, as Christy sat in her favorite coffee shop, reflecting on the day's events, she overheard a conversation at a nearby table. "Did you hear that girl speak at the panel today? The one who used to be a guy? Yeah, she was amazing. So brave. It really made me think, about how we perceive gender and identity." Christy couldn't help but smile to herself. The ripple effect of Mr. Marlowe's experiment was still spreading, challenging perceptions and opening minds. As she gathered her things to leave, a young woman approached her table hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Christy? The one from the panel?" Christy nodded, offering a warm smile. "That's me. How can I help you?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to thank you for sharing your story. I've been struggling with my own identity for years, and hearing you speak today, it gave me hope." Deeply moved, Christy reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. "You're not alone," she said softly. "And there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect just as you are." As the woman walked away, wiping her eyes, Christy felt a new sense of purpose settling over her. Her journey wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all those who were still struggling, still hiding, still afraid to be their true selves. She thought back to that day in Mr. Marlowe's classroom, when a simple experiment had set her on this path. She couldn't have imagined then where it would lead her, but now she couldn't imagine her life any other way. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Christy felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead might not always be easy, but she was ready to face whatever challenges came her way. Because now, finally, she was living as her authentic self. And in that authenticity, she had found not just acceptance, but a calling. To be a voice for those who couldn't yet speak for themselves. To be a beacon of hope in a world that sometimes seemed dark and unwelcoming. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.